Hey friend, welcome back to the Vision Driven Health Podcast, your go-to show for learning how to create healthy habits that last in partnership with the God who created you. I am very excited for this episode because in it, I interview the author of a book that I have been wanting to exist for a long time. And actually, he felt the same way, which is why he wrote it. In this episode, we talk about what it means to follow Jesus and partner with God in healthy eating. We also address some of the issues that exist in the church as it relates to health, in the United States as it relates to our food system, our medical system, as well as some new perspective on the gift of food that God has given us. I encourage you to listen the whole way through and consider reading Andy's new book, Nourished by Design. Let's check it out. Do you find yourself struggling to consistently implement healthy habits? Do you lack energy, confidence, and motivation because of stress, overwhelm, and shame for having not gotten it together by now? Friend, there is hope and grace for your health. Hey, I'm Robin Ryan McDonald, host of the Vision Driven Health Podcast. I'm a follower of Jesus, a wife, a mama of two, and a seminarian turned health coach. And I'm so excited that you're here. I found myself in my early 20s captive to cravings and convenience. 20 pounds heavier, super tired, with a face full of acne. I could not figure out how to maintain healthy habits until I discovered the power of aligning my choices with God's vision. 10 years and 2 kids later, by the grace of God, I'm still prioritizing my health and feeling amazing. If you are over quick fixes and are ready to feel good in your own skin, then grab a giant water bottle and let's dive on in. In this episode, Andy and I talk a bit about the issues with processed food and how it can be very difficult to discern what is actually nourishing to consume. To make this super clear and simple, I created the How to Read Food Labels Guide. It's a free resource that explains exactly what to look for, avoid, and prefer in your grocery shopping. You can get it along with numerous other resources I've created that simplify healthy living. You can get them at visiondrivenhealth.com/resources. All right, so we've got Andy Felton with us. He is a devoted Christian, husband, father of 2 boys, and the author of Nourished by Design, a book exploring the intersection of faith, food, and health. A former nuclear submarine officer and graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, Andy now serves as a manager at Los Alamos National Laboratory. After overcoming his own health challenges, he is passionate about helping others align their physical and spiritual well-being with God's design for flourishing. Andy lives in Los Alamos, New Mexico, where he is an active member of Crossroads Bible Church. Andy, welcome to the Vision Driven Health Podcast.
Thanks, Robin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. I know we've mentioned before, but when I get emails and people requesting to be on the show, it's so funny because sometimes I don't know why they get the idea that my show would be a good fit for them. But when I got your email and I just was like, wait, what? Like, he wrote a book about God and food. And then when I can't remember if you put it in your original email or not, but then when you mentioned that Joel Salatin did your forward, and I figured Joel would not do a forward without reading and approving a book. I was like, well, if Joel approves it, then this is super legit. And then having taken a few bites out of your book, I'm like, wow, people need to know about this book. This is so good and so aligned with my heart and what I feel like the Lord's put on me regarding just our relationship with Him and what it means to care for our bodies. I'm really excited for this conversation, and I'm going to try not to just talk and hype it the whole time. Let's let you share a little bit about yourself and your story and how you ended up coming to write this book.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. You hit it a little bit, right? I was a submarine officer in the Navy. That was kind of my first career. And there was a period of time in my life where I had some serious challenges. And I think that there's a huge overlap between what I experienced and what a lot of other people, especially in America and the West, experience
Hmm.
with kind of the two biggest like health challenges that we have being mental health issues and infertility. And I kind of experienced both of those at the same time. My wife and I were struggling to conceive a child. I had some anxiety issues that I was dealing with, and I kind of realized at that time that my spiritual glass was a little empty, and I needed to start living more based on God's design. And I
Yeah,
was like, what does that even mean? I don't even know what that means. I'd always considered myself a Christian, but I kind of just dove deep in to see how I could partner with God in kind of overcoming some of the issues that I was having. And I kind of found through that process, I think that God was pruning his branch a little bit,
sure.
and kind of leading me in this direction of, diving in deeper and kind of using I'm not a theologian, and I'm not, a doctor either, but using some of the skills that he gave me to kind of dive deeper into these topics and see where they logically lead. And where it led for me was, if I'm going to partner with God and I'm going to choose his designs for my life, right? What does that mean for every area of life? What does that mean? How can I help myself and steward my body, uh, with food, right? With exercise, with, all these things that I was kind of looking into. And so, um, I was looking into, most of the options out there when it comes to, health and wellness, right, is the secular realm. Like everything
Hmm.
that you find, all the popular books, there's really nothing out there, very, very little at least, about a Christian approach to these issues. But, so I was devouring these health and wellness books. Um, a lot of titles that people are probably pretty familiar with. And I was just, there was a lot of good stuff there, a lot of good science, but everything seemed to conflict. And I'm sure that
Sure.
you and your listeners experience this all the time. Like, how do you navigate health and wellness in this culture? And there are so many resources out there, but they're all telling you different things. And I'm like, none of this really makes sense. It seems like they're coming at it from this background that is not based on what I believe as a Christian, right? And so that's kind of where the light bulb went off of, how can I figure out how to really partner with God when it comes to nutrition, right? Kind of zoomed in on that topic because that was an area I thought that there was a need for this type of content. And so I just dove in, and since then I've had a couple kids, and so this journey's been a little bit challenging as I try and do this on the side, but it's been really rewarding, and I'm glad that the product is out there now, and it's getting a warm reception. So.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think it is a solid product. I know you mentioned that you're not a theologian, you're not a doctor. I would not call myself a theologian. I did go to seminary, so I've got at least a taste of what a sound theological piece is. And I don't, I would, I'm tempted to ask this question, but I don't want to deviate from the other questions I have. But I will just say, however you came to wanting to approach this book and your process is an excellent theological approach. I mean, just in general, I think for those of us maybe who've done a little bit more study and have understanding of approaching God's word, but at the end of the day, like I mean, the subtitle of your book, A Christ-Centered Approach, everything does come down to that. And I think the way that you break that down in your book of what's our body, who's God, and pairing all these different things together is really solid. And then even too, on the science standpoint, and you guys, I am hyping this book. Like I'm really stoked about it. I've also searched for different books that pair faith and food and science. And even too, part of why I did this podcast was because I was like, people aren't bridging our faith and our practice when it comes to our physical well-being. Like it's just there are others out there. I think you mentioned as you've explored more, you found more and more people who have some kind of part in this discussion or this work. But yeah, it's definitely not prevalent as we see in church culture at large. But from a science standpoint, I think you've also done a great job. The footnotes, I love footnotes. I think it's because of like my like education background. I fully appreciate the footnotes and just you can see the amount of books and research that you've done. And I also think you've done it in a way that has great theology, has great research, but it's also communicated very palatably. Like it's not, I don't feel like it's over someone's head or like too heady, in my opinion. So as I continue to hype it up, um,
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
yeah, of course. So I wanted to read actually a quote from it. This is a little bit of a longer quote, but I think it's going to head us in a really good direction on unpacking a little bit more about what I was talking about just now. So it said, in your intro, it says Christian farmer and author Joel Salatin argues that attempting to nourish ourselves apart from God's design has led many Christians into a crisis of hypocrisy. He observes that while many Western churchgoers unabashedly affirm God's perfect design when it comes to cultural issues like abortion, marriage, and pornography, we fail to do the same for our diets. Salatin highlights that most Christians act as though they find nothing wrong with participating in worldly food systems that treat God's living creations as mechanical and manipulatable, and, as we'll explore later, tend to pillage God's created order and disregard his design for human health, relationships, and flourishing. So it's a pretty potent quote. I know you're quoting Joel, but it's also setting the stage for what you're talking about in your book. And you kind of continue on in this intro and you say, you talk about a disembodied faith. So I'm curious, what do you mean by a disembodied faith?
Yeah, so I think there's this idea, it's kind of a dualistic idea if you think about it from like the theological perspective, but there's this idea in especially with Christians that our faith is some sort of inner experience that's
Yeah.
like something that is not really tangible.
Hmm.
You can't really put your hands on it. It's like a mindset.
Hmm.
And while that's true to some extent, of course, that's true to some extent. It has to be lived out in the real world in time and space.
Hmm.
If you look at right the arc of redemptive history, you see that God steps into time and space and reality as a physical body,
Right.
and He's crucified as a body, and then He is resurrected as a body. He
Right.
redeems our physical bodies, and so if you're not getting from that you need to be living out your faith in everything that you do on earth. This time that we have, it's not just about accepting Jesus and then, kind of waiting until you die and then floating
Right.
off into the afterlife, right? It's about bearing fruit in the world.
Yeah.
That's how Jesus marks his followers are those that bear fruit, right? And what does that even look like? There is a bodily aspect to that, an aspect that involves our vocations and our physical daily activities. Like, what do we do more than anything? You sleep, you eat, right? Those are the things that we do on earth, apart from working and all the other stuff, right? But are we thinking theologically about how we're doing that stuff, right? Are we
Mhm.
thinking about how that impacts our faith? For the Jews, if you look in the Old Covenant, right, like faith was this tangible,
Very.
all-encompassing way of life, right? They had sacrifices, they had dietary laws, they had purification rituals and cleansings and all these different things. And while that's not necessarily something that, Christians should be following, of course, that's, that the laws were fulfilled in Jesus. I think we take it to an opposite extreme at times,
Hmm.
and we don't actually get the right lessons from that all-encompassing lifestyle. And so that's kind of what I mean by making our faith an embodied faith, is living that out in the daily embodied existence that we have.
I think that's so good and such an important message for the church right now. And I agree. There's this idea of like, and I've talked to so many different people, so many different clients where their their physical health, weight loss, like all these different things, we bring our health things to the Lord. We think about God and our health things when we're praying for healing. Like there's like a, oh no, so and so's in the hospital. Like, oh no, like I just got this diagnosis. And like, so now we're praying and believing for healing, which amen, yes, please continue to do. But when it comes to the daily habits, we forget that God's grace works in those areas. The grace to choose the water over the soda and the grace to get up and go for a run early in the morning and things like that. We have God's grace for. And even too, you mentioned the Old Testament. I had a professor that said it wasn't a belief that you have a body. Like, well, and this is very like a Western, like you said, dualistic perspective. It's not that we have a body or have a soul or have a spirit. He was like, you are a body, you are a soul, you are a spirit. Like they're inextricable from one another. Like it's all together. And I think it's such a valid point that you have of Jesus came like into a physical body. That body lived a very full human life. It was killed and resurrected, and it wasn't. And that's like the crux of Christianity. Like a body was resurrected. If it wasn't a bodily resurrection, we don't have the Christian faith. And Jesus spent, in his 3 years of public ministry, healing physical bodies. If physical bodies didn't matter, then Jesus was wasting his time. Why would he bother? Like, why would he bother healing physical bodies if our physical well-being did not matter? It does. And at the end of the day, it does. And so you write about this, you have this in your book. Um, and yeah, how do you see that changing the way someone approaches their health? You said, are we thinking about this theologically? I don't know that a lot of people ask themselves, am I thinking about this theologically? What would be a way that you think someone might consider their health, their physical bodies as it relates to their relationship with the Lord?
I think a lot of it has to do with stewardship, right?
Good,
It's
yeah,
not, and yeah, you hit the nail on the head. We are a body, right? But um, it's whose body is it, right? In some sense, we do, own the body that we have. We talk about it as though we own it. We say like, my body hurts, my back hurts, as
yeah,
they're like a physical possession. But whose possession really is it,
right.
right? It's God's. It's ours to steward. Even though
Hmm.
it is a part of us, it's also like a gift to us to be able to
Absolutely.
live in this existence. And so, you have to be able to think about it like that. And so if we are stewards of our bodies, what kind of return are we giving to God? What kind of fruit are we actually producing in that body? Right. And so, I love your podcast and how you tie in, and you do it pretty beautifully with just this catch line of vision driven health. Um, that sums it up, right? Because you have to know who you are, whose you are, and where you're going before you can even start to navigate and partner with God in these like health related decisions.
Right.
And that's really the thesis of my book too, is that um, we have this science that gives us this power to travel, unprecedented. And there's tons of scientific resources out there, but you don't even know how to navigate it until you know who you are and where you're going, right? Like
Right.
until you can answer the big questions in life, you can't even start to ask the kind of the scientific, you know, daily questions of what's better and what's best and stuff like that. You can't even start to make those value decisions until you know what your purpose is. Right. And so I think that's really like the crux of the issue is you have to develop that theme before you can even start to approach the science. And that's why I devote like a third of the book where we don't even really touch science. It's strictly like theology and kind of developing these foundations for health, for the food that we eat, for the body that we exist in and that we are, right? That's the foundation that I saw missing. And even like the Christian literature on this, really skims over those topics, in my
Right.
opinion. Like it's kind of disappointing because I never really actually wanted to write a book. Like, it just happened because I was like, man, I can't find anything
Yeah.
that really devotes any real estate to answering these questions and setting that foundation, right? So yeah, I think that it's really all about stewardship and kind of knowing who you are and where you're going.
And I love that that's the approach that you took because similarly, I every single program that I've had, every client that I've worked with, we start with who is God, who are you, and what are you called to? And that before I give them any like I might say like start drinking more water and like let's try and cook some more food, but I'm not going to tell you like anything about nutrition until we address these things, especially addressing the lies that we've taken on. I have my clients do this exercise where I have them write out every single hindering thought that they have around their health, which whether that might be I'm just bound to have the same chronic diseases as my parents, I'm weak-willed, I always fall off track, things like that that get to align with the truth of God's word and what's possible in partnership with God. Because if we don't come to a place where we are compelled, like you're talking about, by our understanding of whose our body really belongs to, what He's called us to do. You also mentioned it's about bearing fruit. One of the big passions that I have for this is like, and why I started this is because I saw my grandparents suffering from chronic disease. They're the most precious, God-loving, gracious, faithful people, and they were suffering from diabetes, heart disease, dementia, arthritis, and they ate terribly. They had no idea. They were just a product of the food system of this country. And I just thought, hold on. And they were just, there were a couple pastors that passed away in the denomination that I was a part of who were super young, same thing, chronic diseases. And I was like, this is a very insidious plan of the enemy to undo the body of Christ, to undo God's people from having the physical capacity to do what they're called to do. This is a massive problem. And like you're talking about, we it is normative. It is not common in the church to talk about health, to talk about nutrition, to talk about how our bodies directly impact our ability to do what God's called us to.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why that's the case, and you look at like, we have 2,000 years of historical church and theology, and
Hmm.
you don't see like health and wellness, nutrition, fitness. You don't see these topics come up, right? You see everything but that. And it's like, why? I was trying to, thinking about this question, like, why do we have no real like Christian resources for these topics? And it's because it's just we have this culture now that's so broken
Hmm.
that it's never existed like that in the 2,000 years of church history. We've never
Hmm.
had a culture that's deliberately like made people unwell, right?
Hmm.
Just by
Hmm.
living
Hmm.
in the culture, right? Like
Right.
um it would have been silly if Calvin would have written a huge uh dissertation on health and wellness
Right.
and what to eat and what not to eat because people struggle just to put food on the table, right?
Right.
Like they were just trying to find some food and everything that they had was real, minimally processed, right? They
Right.
didn't have
They grew
red
it
dye
themselves.
40,
Hmm.
they didn't have pesticides, like so it would have just been laughable to like write a dissertation on health. Right. And so we live in this moment now where we actually have to start thinking about those things. And if we're not thinking about those things from a Christian lens, then you're just doing it wrong because if I too know so many like great Christians that are faithful, they're reading their Bibles, they're showing up every day, and then I look and they're struggling with disease and things like that and it's just like frustrating because I'm like, man, can't you see the connection,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Like um if you just thought about this from a theological perspective and you thought about how your healthy habits impact your actual work, how they actually impact your faith on a day-to-day basis, things like that. So I think it's just the culture of where we are, not having this theological understanding that's, because we've just never had this problem before, right? And I
I
think the church is caught with its pants down a little bit, to put it bluntly.
no, I think that is funny. I actually think that's so true. And And it is like that because that's such a funny metaphor. I think that's 100% exactly what it is. They're like, like all of a sudden, they don't know how their pants got down. They don't know why their pants are down, but they're down. And I think that it's it is 100% not even knowing the issue that they're swimming in, and even to like just not even having a reference for the connection between their faith and food. Like it's just it's not on the grid. It's becoming more on the grid. There's been some efforts towards it. I know you and I talked a little bit about like the Daniel diet, which I think we'll save that for hopefully another episode and get more into that. But there's been some attempts that I think could have used a little bit more research. Um, but with that said, yeah, we're in a place where we've been engulfed in a culture, and even to like you saying that the early church, they were concerned with being overly religious about food laws and things, and Paul had to address that, to like keep the peace amongst the Gentiles and the Jews, and like, hey guys, like we're all believers, like, and so it was a completely different dynamic than you said. Yeah, as we get further along, people are just trying to survive, eat enough, period. It's not like, is this organic versus not? It was all organic. Like, so I think you're so right. And that actually segues great into what I wanted to chat about next. So in your introduction, you actually do a really great and I think very eye-opening summary for a lot of people. When they read it, it'll be eye-opening on how different beliefs and conclusions from certain influential people shaped the food requirements for the United States and created this horrible, devolving mess of collective health. And the show, a lot of people we have listening internationally, and it makes me so sad that the poor food systems and processes of the United States have also influenced other countries as well. Thankfully, a lot of countries have kind of put their foot down and made standards that are far better than ours. But, McDonald's has found its ways to every corner of the earth and fast food, systems and things like that. But what would you say some of the main specific issues are with current health and food today?
Yeah, so I mean, there are just so many, so obviously so many issues here. You hit it as far as, the way that a bad theology of food, a bad theology of health, all these things have actually impacted a lot of this Western diet that we have, right? I talk about it in the book. Ellen White, the kind of prophetess of the Seventh-day Adventist Church in the 19th century, really develops a lot of this framework for health and wellness that, while our diet is a far cry from what she would have been proposing, this anti-meat bias that she had by reading into Genesis a little bit too much, I think, um, really laid the foundation for like the processed food industry, whether she would endorse it today or not, right? And so, you see the processed food industry, you actually see nutrition as a science developed because of these influences too.
Hmm.
You also, the breakfast is the most important meal of the day. The highly processed cereal category didn't even exist before the Seventh-day Adventist Church kind of put its mark in that area. And then even the food, like the dietary laws that Congress put out back in, there was a Senate Select Committee back in like 1977, and the person who ended up writing the dietary regulations that we all know because they haven't really changed much since then, right? Was a Seventh-day Adventist who I think had kind of a false theology of of nutrition. And so these issues are relevant. It's not like that we're just kind of putting a Christian stamp on it. You know, these what you think about nutrition from a theological perspective, it really makes a big difference, and it has for the Western diet. And that's not all of it. It's not to blame any specific person, but it's just to kind of look back at history and see what has happened and where are we now. And you look at, for example, those dietary restrictions, you start to see um, saturated fat and sodium like completely demonized, cholesterol completely demonized, and you start to take away like the best sources of nutrition that we have. Like think about eggs, right? Eggs cooked in butter for example, right?
The
Saturated
best.
fat, throw a little salt on there, cholesterol. People were scared of that for a long time,
Hmm.
right? And I think we're starting to swing a little bit in the other direction, which is great when it comes to some of that stuff. But you still see, right, this processed food industry that, pesticide-laden grains are, the things that are being recommended. You've got the American Heart Association that's recommending these ultra processed oils as heart healthy. You know, there are so many problems that we still have to overcome. People are starting to like recognize that these are problems and it's becoming more mainstream. So this isn't like totally new information or anything like that. But we're still having a hard time really navigating those influences, right? You start to see the offshoots that go in the other direction of like, okay, we're gonna you just do keto or
Hmm.
vegan is the way or carnivore and there's nothing really wrong with any of these diet frameworks necessarily. Um, but you have to really think about them the right way and you have to make sure you're getting the right stuff in there. And any of those can go wrong pretty quickly if you're not
Right.
really thinking about it in the right way from a holistic paradigm for what, nutrition is supposed to look like. And so I try not to advocate for any like specific diet.
Yeah.
Um, and I also don't advocate for like the everything in moderation approach that we've been kind of taught by
Yeah. Yeah.
society, because that has its own flaws too. But
Yeah.
if you think about it more in terms of like, what do I need to get from my diet, right? What are the elements that I need, and what is the stuff that I need to avoid? Then you can start to have a little bit more clarity on how to navigate those things.
Yeah. And I agree. I think we are seeing a great swing in the right direction with people becoming more aware, especially with looking at the seed oils, people becoming more aware that like, hey, yeah, eggs are cool. And then all of a sudden eggs aren't available anymore. No, but it's I think we're seeing some good progress and whatnot, but at the same time, I can't tell you like the influence of those dietary guidelines, especially since a lot of the clients that I worked with are a little more, or usually more middle-aged. So that would have been so prevalent in their younger years when they're raising kids of like, this is what's healthy, this is what's not, like get your grains in, like don't have too much meat, like all those things that they learned. And then even too, we think of like the 50s and when they transitioned to the TV dinners and how that was like the modern woman's way and like that became like the trendy thing to do. And so there's so many things, or even like I was just telling you, the Campbell's chicken soup casseroles and finding ways to take these processed things and then still make something that's like homemade. And it's just gotten really, really convoluted. And yes, despite there being progress, I would say by and large, we're still, majority of people don't have a full grasp. And that's just unfortunately the pulse, I think, of our country and our food system. So with that kind of where we're at, and people, I think, like you said, the church has their pants down. People don't even realize like that we're in this place. We don't even realize to the full extent of how much would need to change on what's become normal, even what's normal on aging, what's normal on how many medications you take, what's normal on what you can expect. Like, oh, you turn, like my mom, I'm so grateful. She's not on any medications. And she has so many friends her age who they're like, you're not on any medications? And she's like, no. And it's like revolutionary. I'm like, Lord. So
Yeah, it's bad.
it
I think
is.
it's four for the average American who takes prescription medications. It's four on average, and it's just absolutely ridiculous.
And And yeah, it's like you start with one, and because that one does this thing, then you have to take the other one, or like it, and then all of them are like, well, you have this condition, so you have to be on this medication for life. And I prided myself on working with clients and helping them get off medications in partnership with their doctor. But I was like, have them test your blood work. Like, does it make sense for you to keep taking this if your triglycerides are in this place, if your A1C is now down to here, if, your blood pressure is now here? What, like that seems counterproductive if you're taking a medication that's doing something your body has now started to do because we've shifted your diet and lifestyle. So I love this quote from chapter 1, and I wanted to kind of end talking about what our bodies need. So you say, but unlike the divine, who needs nothing. Our needy bodies are made of the same stuff as the rest of creation and are wholly reliant on it for sustenance. If we understand creation as a manifestation of God's self-offering love, then our constant need to be fed and nourished is an object lesson in which the daily need to be filled with and transformed by God's love, by which we are sanctified into the kind of people who are able to offer themselves as gifts. I love that so much. I think thinking of our bodies, the process by which we need to be nourished as an object lesson. We see even in the New Testament so much of that, the fruits of the Spirit. We see there's so much evidence of that in being fed, even a lot of agriculture and whatnot. Like there is this dependence on God's creation and a dependence that we have on Him, and all the more too, like why wouldn't our body have dependence on things, on certain things versus other things? Our spiritual health needs certain nutrition. We want to feed our minds and bodies with the things of the Lord, with His word. We don't want to be fed by the things of the world. Why are our bodies any different? Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so you hit the nail right on the head with, you know, God being our ultimate sustainer and satisfying all of our hungers, right? And because we are people that are not just spirits, not just floating souls that are housed in a body, because we are actually a body and a mind and a soul and a spirit, we have to rely on God for filling our tank when it comes to all of those things, right? And by placing us here as embodied people within the rest of creation, uh, it should be humbling a little bit that we're made of the same stuff as like the earth, right? Like we come from the earth. God breathes life into us, but we are made of the earth, right? Um, and some people take this in the wrong direction, as though we're kind of like insignificant and useless, just kind of specially evolved, you know, primate, right? But um, if you look at that as just an aspect of something that God's trying to communicate to us, right? We have to actually partner with Him, partner with His designs. We have to reconcile with the fact that we're a part of creation and that we're sustained by creation and that He provides that for us, right? And that we're supposed to have dominion over and exercise this thoughtful, careful, um, control over creation, right? Um, you know, I think when you look at that, when you look at it that way, you start to see food as something that God gives us so that we can understand what it means to be filled and to have a discerning way about how we fill ourselves with other, how we satisfy our other hungers, right? Not just for food, but for, spiritual discipline, right? Things like that. Um, our need for food becomes an object lesson for all of the hungers that we're trying to satisfy. And that's you know, how food ends up really informing our faith. It's how we exercise our faith. And so, yeah, I think, it's just really important the fact that we have bodies, that God has given us this tank that we need to fill in multiple ways, and that He uses food, He puts food into us so that we can actually know what it means to be one body in Christ. We can't even know that until we know what a body is, where it comes from, how it's filled up, right? Um, and so those things are all just kind of beautifully woven together, um, in the way that God created us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, there's just this beautiful thing. I try to capture the hearts of my listeners. I think so many of them dearly love Jesus and want to live the lives that He has for them. They want to know Him more. They want to have that intimacy with Him. They want to get more in His word. They want all those things. And I think a lot of them too have big faith for the freedom and the breakthrough that God can bring. I love hearing testimonies of people who've found themselves in addiction or who found themselves just like in a broken, uh, maybe a broken marriage, or they find themselves in just a dark, discouraging time, and God brings them out and they get to testify of His goodness and His faithfulness. And I think you and I both are hearing Andy saying that God has that same freedom for your body and for your approach to food. I think so often, it's like, yeah, God can, you know, oh, I don't know. Sometimes people don't think that he can, but redeem this marriage or can, provide for me financially or whatever. But when it comes to like me actually losing the 10 pounds, like I don't think he's interested in that. And what I think both of us are trying to get at is, and what I'm constantly trying to beat the drum of is, what if we shifted the focus from losing the 10 pounds to, like you're saying, this void within me that's like stressed out, that's looking for comfort, that's looking for something, and it's being filled with food and finding freedom there. And then that then translates into some weight loss because you're no longer dependent emotionally upon the satisfaction of that evening pint of ice cream or that, midway super sugary Starbucks drink or whatever the vice is, the convenience of fast food versus taking the time and structuring your schedule around cooking at home. Sometimes I wouldn't not do it, but sometimes I'm like, man, my kids better know how blessed they are. Like when I'm doing all the dishes and like spending all this time in the kitchen to like cook whole foods. But that happens and that's there because there has to be that shift in priority and understanding where the freedom comes from. And like you're saying, like that does come from finding fulfillment and satisfaction in Jesus first and foremost. And I think that's really, really where it's at.
Well, just piggybacking off what you just said,
Yeah.
um, you talk about food freedom and how do you kind of um, power past some of these, addictions that people have, break free of some of those issues where, I see this dichotomy all the time. Like healthy is this thing that's like, oh, healthy doesn't taste good, right? Like,
Mm,
um,
I'm glad you said this.
that's like that's wrong.
Yeah.
If you're looking at food and you're seeing and the only thing that gets you going is Twizzlers and ice cream, right? Or like, McDonald's cheeseburgers and stuff, right? Like you're doing it wrong. Like, let me tell you, because, good food in partnership with God's design, it tastes good, right? You
Tastes
don't
so
have
good.
to, um, last night, just an example, we had chicken Alfredo, and so I'm sitting there like pouring, cup and a half of heavy whipping cream, and like, you know, dishing out this like huge amount of like Parmesan cheese into this sauce. And when you don't buy it at the store and it's not full of chemicals and all sorts of ultra processed oils and junk, man, does it taste good.
Yeah.
And it's real and it's you could say like, yeah, sure, that's not like the healthiest meal in the world, but it tastes good, right? Like that's the point. Like you shouldn't be looking at food as though it's something to guard against, right? It's a
Yeah.
gift from God. And if you're
Yeah.
looking at it that way, then you've got your understanding of nutrition like completely backwards,
Right.
right? And so that's really the point is like, how can you break free of some of these limiting perspectives that society has put on food. Um, and God chooses to reveal himself as food for us, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The Old Testament um, kind of sets the typology for this, where you've got all these types of food that God is revealing, and He's connecting them with His self, His persona, right? The bread of the presence is kind of like a little known thing. If you go back in like
Mm-hmm.
Leviticus and Deuteronomy, you'll see these 12 loaves that are baked by the priests every week, and they're put in the holy place in the temple. And they end up coming to symbolize God's face on earth. There's a command in Leviticus um, where the Jewish men had to appear before the face of the earth 3 times a year. And the way that they did that is they would go to Jerusalem, and the priests would hold up these loaves of bread and say, "Here's God's face, behold God's love for you." So are we looking at food that way, right? Are we looking at food as this great, beautiful blessing that we get to enjoy?
Mm-hmm.
In partnership with God, or are we looking at it as this thing like, okay, I can indulge over here and be unhealthy, or I can be healthy and I can eat like, uh, this parsley and like 2 walnuts, right? Like that is not, that's not at all like the message that we need to be promoting. And I think when people start to realize that, um, when they start to get their view of food right and they start to look at it with an eye towards like indulgence and healthfulness at the same end of the spectrum, then they start to understand how you can actually live out these things because then you don't have to fight your biology anymore. You don't have to actually fight a disordered will. You just order your will around God's design and everything falls into place, right? That's really the message of the book is not being like super disciplined and stuff like that. It's about understanding how God's food is a gift, how this health that he provides us is not something that comes by sacrificing, right? It comes by living out his design and receiving his gifts faithfully.
Oh, it's so good. I'm so glad you touched on that as we're wrapping this conversation up because I think that's so important and key. Like, I'm a big foodie. Like, I love food. And I think that is a big shift for people to realize the home cooked real food stuff. And I'm same as you. Like, I make my own dressings, I make my own sauces. Like, one, it's super fun and satisfying. Like, I made that. Like, and even two, like I was so stoked. We've got chickens, we have our own eggs, we have a lemon tree. I made lemon curd with our own eggs and with our own lemons. Yeah, it still had sugar in it, but it's so much different than buying something from the store with all the preservatives. I can control the amount of sugar. You don't need as much sugar when it's that real whole food stuff. But I think that's so important for people to realize partnering with God and his design and choosing his foods is not like, okay, like let me try and like deny my flesh of these pleasures. It's like, no, God's so good that he made food taste good and that he wants you to explore the vast like depth of the flavors and combinations that he has put together just by pairing whole foods. Like, don't fall into the trap of chicken and broccoli and rice. Like, go beyond it. Like, make some sauces. Like, pair some different things together. Like, please. So I love that you talked about that. That's so key, so important. And as we're wrapping up, I do I definitely want to have another conversation with you. I think the listeners will appreciate as we start to actually get more into what you just described. Like, wait a second, what? Because we're starting off with saying like as believers, like we're falling for all these things, like we're not certain our bodies. And it can, I think if someone doesn't understand that food's good, that this process is enjoyable, it can be like, oh man, like, yeah, I got to get it together. So we will have a conversation talking about how getting it together is freeing and delicious. But where can people get your book? This is coming out, your book's available. Where can they get it? I know you've got another guide that you put together that has some practicals. Let's make sure people know where to get a hold of this.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. It's on Amazon exclusively. It can be purchased. It's called Nourished by Design, a Christ-centered approach to nutrition. And like you said, I set up a website too called nourishedbydesignbook.com. And it has a helpful companion guide that's like a little devotional guide that kind of summarizes a lot of the kind of key takeaways as you're going through the book. So I'd encourage readers to check it out on Amazon and also to check out that website and download that free resource so that they can kind of get the most out of it and implement it practically in their lives, once they've finished reading it. So
Yeah, absolutely. And I will put the links to all of that in the show notes as well, so nobody will have to look farther than there. And I encourage listeners, text some friends, tell them that you just heard about this super cool book and that there's this guide that goes with it. And you guys just set a time. Let's do book club. Let's read it, go through the guide, get some friends. And yeah, I think this can be really transformative and helpful for a lot of people. So thank you so much, Andy, for reaching out to me, for coming on the show, for honestly putting in the work to make this book a reality. I think it's such an excellent resource. And for yeah, joining us today.
well, thanks, Robin, for everything you do for the body and for Christian women. And I really hope that this resource helps people as well, and that they're complementary with the message that you're promoting, and that we get to have another good conversation sometime soon. So I really appreciate it.
Sounds good. We'll plan on it. Thank you so much for listening to the Vision Driven Health Podcast today. I hope this episode inspired you, supported you, and blessed you in some way. If it did, it would mean the world if you would leave a 5-star written review on Apple Podcast and share this episode on your social media. The more reviews and shares this gets, the more people can be blessed and encouraged in creating a Jesus-centered, sustainable, healthy lifestyle.
If you want to hang with me and other Jesus-loving ladies who are creating healthy habits that last, be sure to join my free Facebook group, the Made Well Mastermind. Use the link in the show notes to join. Be blessed with hope, joy, and health. I'll see you next week. Again, the Vision Driven Health Podcast is under the umbrella of Mabel Health Incorporated. The content on this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended for medical advice. It does not take the place of medical advice or treatment from a physician. Listeners should consult their own doctor or a qualified healthcare professional for specific health concerns and questions.